Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys are the patient ones. You've been here all this time and you're still alive and have a pulse. How nice it is to be with you. Well, Jennifer was mentioning something about my longtime relationship with the Clinton political machine. What most people don't know is that every time I ever ran for public office, I ran against the Clinton political machine. I ran against their money. I ran against them. Virtually every election, both Bill and Hillary Clinton would come back and campaign for every opponent I ever had. If somebody wants to know what is it like running against their organization or their apparatus, come see me. I'll be happy to tell you. I'll show you some scars, because I got quite a few. My first election to lieutenant governor was in 1993, Bill Clinton's first year as president. And what most people don't know about Arkansas is that it is not that reliably red state. At least it wasn't then. In fact, when I was elected lieutenant governor in a special election, I was only the fourth Republican elected in 150 years to a statewide office. And when I got there, they were so excited to see me that my door was nailed shut from the inside. That is not an apocryphal story. That is not an exaggeration. The Wall Street Journal flew John Fund, who was writing for them at the time, to Little Rock to see, was it so? And he reported back that there are physical, literal nails in the door. And it wasn't just that they nailed it shut, but it remained nailed shut for my first 59 days as the lieutenant governor of Arkansas. When the door was finally opened, I went into the office that was designated for the lieutenant governor. It had been stripped of all the office furniture. The budget had been zeroed out. And that was my welcome to the Clinton political machinery of the state of Arkansas. I was reelected the next year with the largest vote of a Republican in the history of the state, in large measure because people were tired of the political machine that they had seen chew them up and spit them out. After being elected to a 4-year term as lieutenant governor, I was down my end of the hall minding my own business when the Democratic governor was convicted of Whitewater-related felonies and was forced to resign. That put me in the office of governor. It was the first of a long string of Democratic officials who were busted for various forms of corruption. We used to say the 5 most feared words of an Arkansas politician were these: will the defendant please rise? In fact, when a person said, you're governor, how many terms? Office or prison? It was a tough environment. When I became governor in 1996, the legislature consisted of 89 Democrats in the House to 11 Republicans. In the Senate, it was 31 Democrats to 4 Republicans. You probably think, being up here in New Hampshire, that the most lopsided, most partisan state in America has been Massachusetts, but you would be wrong. You might think it was Vermont, Maine, Oregon, or California, but you would be wrong. The most partisan state, the reddest state, the most Democratic state, the most lopsided state in America was Arkansas, and I inherited it as governor. But you know what that did for me? I learned how to govern. Because when you go into the Capitol every day and the people really don't like you and don't want you to succeed, but you still are able to get 90% of your legislative package passed, it's because you learn how to govern. I hear some people say, we're going to have someone who knows how to fight. I tell you what, if you battled the political machine that I battled, you know how to fight. But we need somebody who knows how to win the fight, not just start it. And folks, one of the challenges that we face is not just to fight the fight, but to fix what the fight has been about. And it's so very important because this election will so determine some of the great realities of whether or not our nation is going to be free, whether our nation is going to be safe, and whether or not there's going to be the true American dream being able to live out for every single young American. I'll be making an announcement on Tuesday, May the 5th, in my hometown of Hope, Arkansas, a little town you may have heard of. Bill Clinton was born there, but he moved away when he was 5. My family didn't have enough money to move away. We were still there when I graduated from high school. The little house I grew up in, a little shotgun rent house on 2nd Street, still there. My dad never finished high school. His dad didn't. His dad before him didn't. His dad before him didn't. I'm the first male in my entire family lineage that ever graduated from high school, much less went to college. My dad was like a lot of yours. He lifted heavy things. He worked hard, got his hands dirty. But he believed in this country. And when I was 8 years old, he took me down to hear the governor of Arkansas make a speech. I'll never forget. He said, "Now, son, I'm going to take you down and hear the governor. He's going to make a talk. I want you to go down and hear it because, son, you may live your whole life and you may never meet a governor in person." Nobody would have ever believed that his boy could have become one. But becoming a governor and serving in the capacity for 10.5 years, I learned a lot of things, and the most important thing I learned was that when people get into government and they forget why they went and what they went to do, something is tragically wrong with our system of public service. Last year, I campaigned in 37 states trying to help us win the majority in the U.S. Senate and get Harry Reid moved to the back of the room. I guess he was so excited he's going to move back to Nevada, and that's the best news we've had in America in a long, long time. And I thought if we can just get Republicans elected in the majority of the Senate and add the numbers to the House, that at least they will stand up to this lawless president who ignores the Constitution, and after 22 times saying that there's nothing he can do all by himself on the issue of immigration, then he says he's got a pen and a phone, and he unconstitutionally and illegally goes ahead and does something that even he admitted 22 times he didn't have the authority to do. I would have an expectation that at least those people that we work so hard to elect would stand up to him, not on a political issue, but on a constitutional legal issue, and say, "Mr. President, our job under this Constitution, the job to which we have held up our hand and sworn to uphold, this Constitution says you can't do it, and we stand to tell you that you can't and that you won't." I want the Republican Party to start acting like the Republican Party. One of the ways that I believe we will repair this great republic of ours is when we finally begin to realize public service should not be a permanent lifetime career. When do we have term limits in this country and say when you go to Congress, it is not going to be the proverbial Roach Motel where you go in but you never come out. We should say you go in and after a reasonable period of time, you come out, go home, and find out what it's like to live under the laws that you pass for the rest of us. We need term limits for the legislative, and let me add, the judicial branch of our federal government. I believe also that the dangers that we face in a very, very troubled world are such that we have to have true leadership, not apologies, but leadership. Driving from the back seat of the car is a sure way for a tragic accident. The fact that the Middle East is in extraordinary trouble and our president thinks somehow we can sit down and make a deal with the Iranians is nonsense. They've never made a deal that they kept, never. Now, I grew up in South Arkansas. We had snakes in South Arkansas. And I'm not just talking about the ones that got elected to something either. We had rattlesnakes, we had cottonmouth snakes, we had copperhead snakes. 3 dangerous, potentially deadly snakes. I learned as an early kid, when you're dealing with a snake, you don't try to reason with a snake and try to understand why he would be so upset as to bite you. You don't pet the snake. You don't feed the snake. You don't try to have a conversation with or reason with the snake. You get a .410 shotgun or a shovel or a hoe, and you take the snake's head off before he bites you. What we are dealing with in the Middle East is nothing short of a viper that will bite us unless we can end its threat before it becomes an imminent threat to our own children and grandchildren. We must never make an apology for the strength of America. We must never, ever get to the place where we believe that we're not vulnerable and be so naive as to think we can sit down with people who are the sponsors of state terrorism, with Hamas, Hezbollah, who have interfered in Yemen and Libya, and somehow believe that they'll just make nice with us if we'll let them continue their murderous, kidnapping, and terroristic ways, because they won't. But we've got trouble at home that we have to address. I hear people talk about all the time, we need to get rid of the IRS. I don't know of anybody who thinks that the IRS is a wonderful institution and we should add to it. But I know one thing, there's only one way to get rid of the IRS. People can say, let's get rid of it, but there's one plan in place, and that is the enactment of the fair tax, which would eliminate the IRS, repeal the 16th Amendment, and it would no longer punish people for their productivity and reward people for their irresponsibility. I am a fair tax supporter because it will change our economy. For the uninitiated, the fair tax simply says we end all the taxes on that which produces something. We end taxes on income, savings, investment, capital gains, inheritance. They become zero. We pay tax at the point of consumption. When we buy something, we pay the tax. That means that the drug dealers, the prostitutes, the pimps, and the gamblers will be paying the same taxes that you were paying, and they aren't because they're not reporting that on their 1040. I'm pretty sure. For those who think that the fair tax would punish the people at the bottom, they don't understand the fair tax because nothing empowers people more effectively who are at the bottom than does having a tax that untaxes their basic necessities but empowers them to work hard and move up the rung to the ladder. And I learned a lot about how that would work right here in New Hampshire 8 years ago. I was touring a machine shop, and I was visiting the workers in the machine shop, and the guy pulled me aside. He said to me, I've got a daughter who is in Cornell in grad school. And grad school in Cornell is $50,000 a year for her. My first reaction was, thank God my daughter doesn't want to go to Cornell grad school. And then he said, I've been working at this machine shop. I've got a high school education. I want my daughter to do better than me. Does that sound familiar? That's what every parent says. He said, I decided that I wanted to work a second shift. I would work 16 hours a day, not 8. And the second shift that I would work, I'd dedicate all of that to my daughter so she wouldn't come out of school with a huge debt on top of her. And so I started working 16 hours a day. And I got my first paycheck, thinking, well, it's going to be twice what it used to be. And I got it, and I looked at it, and I said, there's a big mistake here. It's not much more than the 8-hour paycheck. And so we went to the accountant for the machine shop, and he said, wait a minute, there's a mistake. The accountant said, no, there's not. You see, here's the problem. Because you're now working 16 hours a day and not 8, you are now in a new tax bracket. And so the second shift that he was working wasn't working for his daughter in grad school. He was working so the government could take it out of his pocket. Why are we punishing somebody who's trying to move ahead? With the fair tax, if a person works twice as hard, they make twice as much money. The government doesn't put them in a system that keeps them from ever being able to reach the next rung on the ladder. My friend, there's something horribly wrong with a tax system where the agency that collects it has information about you they have no business knowing, files that information, demands that you cough up receipts from 7 years ago. They can't even keep their own emails for 7 days, much less the material that they've had for 7 years. They can investigate you. They can find you at fault. They can even assess the penalty. They can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to collect $10 out of you. And they use your money to do it. And I think most Americans would agree that the IRS has become a criminal enterprise, and we need to get rid of it. But the only way to get rid of it is to enact the fair tax, because it's the only plan that eliminates the need for some government agency to get as deep into our business as the IRS gets into. This is why I believe that we need to be bold in our approach to how to fix this country of ours and make it better. As a kid growing up, I grew up in a town called Hope, but I wanted more than just to have a town named Hope. I wanted to believe that there really was hope for kids like me. When I think about the great opportunities this country has afforded me, it makes me love America a lot. When I think about the way we've squandered our position in the world, and we've punished people trying to work their way out of the hole of poverty, trying to work their way out of a system that has enslaved them to government dependency, I'm reminded that I became a Republican as a teenager, not because there were very many in my county. There weren't. All the Republicans in the county, there were all of 7 of them. All of them either had moved in from somewhere else or been messed with. There had been no native Republicans to the county. I told people for a long time I wasn't even sure my own parents ever voted for me. I became a Republican not because I was rich. I became a Republican because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life poor, waiting on the government to rescue me out of poverty. That's why I became a Republican and a conservative. I still believe that this country ought to be a place where hope is not just some town in southwest Arkansas, and where hope is not something that a person running for president says he has the audacity of. Turns out he didn't have the audacity of hope. He just had sheer audacity to believe that he was the law and above the Constitution, and that there were no sense of equal branches of government and checks and balances. We're a nation of laws, not a nation just of personalities and brute political power. If you want 4 or 8 more years of that, we can just sit back and have a big fight among the Republicans and do the Democrats' dirty work for them. The Republicans can all get into this, and we'll have, I don't know, a lot of folks. And we can have a free-for-all, fratricide, demolition derby, as has happened over the past few cycles. And the result will be we will have made the Democrats' work quite easy for them. Folks, here's how I look at the presidential sweepstakes. Every Republican that either is or is potentially going to run all wants to be the quarterback of the team. But the best way to earn the job would be the quarterback is to play the best game, to prove on the practice field that we actually can lead, and we have a history of doing it. Our country is going through some storms, and we're headed for some tougher ones. And I think most of you, if you get on an airplane and you look up there in the cockpit knowing you're about to fly through some storms, you look up there and who's sitting in the left seat, you want it to be somebody who has flown through a lot of thunderstorms, not somebody who just got out of flight school. You'll make the decision, but I hope that the decision is made based on who can play the game the best, not who can savage the other people who want the job. Because if that's what happens to us and we allow it, we will end up seeing our hopes dashed once again. And this time we can't afford it. As I said at the beginning, I know the Clintons all too well. They play to win. And they play and do anything necessary in order to win. I faced them time and time again. I live to win. I live to even tell about it. That in itself is remarkable. Now we have to unite and do something extraordinary for this great country. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Los Angeles, and I was going to be on the Bill Maher show. I know how much all of you love Bill Maher and his conservative positions. People ask me sometimes, why do I do shows like that? It's because I'm not afraid of Bill Maher. I know what I believe. I feel like I can defend it and articulate it, and so I've done his show many times. I was going to be on the Bill Maher show. They sent a driver to come pick me up. So the driver comes, picks me up at the hotels, taking me to the studio, and I get in the car, introduce myself, ask him his name. He says, my name is Dimitri. I said, well, that doesn't sound like you're from Alabama. He said, no, I'm from the old Soviet Union. I said, when did you come to America? He said, 1988. I said, Dimitri, why did you leave the Soviet Union? I mean, that was a year before communism began to collapse all over Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union fell. Why did you leave? He said, because I spent my whole life with my government lying to me. And the government telling me that I lived in a great country and that America was a terrible place, but I knew that that was not true. And he said, I wanted to leave that country because I knew I couldn't stay there, and I had a little daughter, and I wanted a better life for her, and I wanted to get her out of there. He came to this country with $250, and that's it, and a daughter. And he said, I wish I could say to every American what a great country this is. Because this country has allowed me to now own my own business. I own this car and several others. I have people who work for me. I said, Dimitri, tell me, where's your daughter these days? That daughter that you brought here in 1988, what's happened to her? She said, she's in her 30s, she has kids, she's married, she's a college graduate and a registered nurse and works in a clinical care unit, and she's doing great. I said, Dimitri, I wish you would tell your story. I wish more people would hear your story. He said, I don't talk so good. I have an accent. I said, Dimitri, you make more sense and talk better than 90% of the people we've elected to Congress. I can assure you, we ought to be hearing from you. And Dimitri said, well, I don't think I'll ever have that platform. I told Dimitri, you may not. Maybe you don't want it. But I hope I can tell your story and the story of so many like you and remind Americans that some people have come to this country to escape a tyranny, and they found liberty. They found the ability to live their lives free and to do something great for their kids. And whether you were born in Hope, Arkansas and climbed your way from the hole of poverty in which you were dug, or whether you come from the Soviet Union and you escape from there and defect with nothing but a couple of $100 in your pocket and a little girl, let us never, ever be in a place where this country is not the country where you start is not where you have to stop, and that you can dream the dreams and live them. That's what America is all about. We have to have that again. You're the key to that. Thank you, and God bless you. And I'm going to take some questions for the next few minutes. So I understand we have a couple of microphones in the crowd, and the way this works is you'll ask a brief question, right? And then I'll answer it. And what I'll do is I'll hear the question that I want to answer, no matter what it is. And by the way, this is called in politics Q&A. You think that stands for questions and answers. Actually, it stands for questions and avoidance. You ask whatever you want. I try to not have a career-ending answer here this afternoon. So is this the first one right here? Okay.
Governor, thank you so much for coming. In order to counter China, radical Islam, Russia, there probably is no more important an alliance by the United States than with that other great world democracy, which is the Republic of India. And while the U.S. likes India, they like Indians, America blessed its nuclear status right away. Republicans even have 2 governors of Indian descent. One of them spoke to us not long ago here. They ran another one in California. But basically, the U.S. kind of ignores this natural ally. How will you redefine, as president, that relation to ensure that democracy in the world survives well into the next century? Thank you.
India is a country with whom we share a lot. I also believe that Israel is a country with whom we share that sense of democracy, with whom we mirror, in so many ways, that same sense of people who were created in order to escape a tyranny. And the alliances that we have are alliances that we need to recognize their value. After 6.5 years of the President Obama, Hillary Clinton policies, let me ask you this. Can you name a country on this planet with whom we have a better relationship today than we had when they took office? Can you name one? I hear Cuba, I hear Iran. Actually, I understand what you're saying. It's not true. Cuba is still a place where people are held political prisoner, and Iran is a place where they're still working to build a bomb. It's not that we have a better relationship. It's just that the Iranians think we're chumps instead of champions, and Americans need to be champions, not chumps to the world. We need to stand with those who are like us and stand firmly against those who are not. And wherever that democracy exists, I've been to India. It's a remarkable country. It's amazing what is happening there. It's overwhelming to be there, but it is remarkable. I would say that one of the reasons that we've got to change policies is because I want to say to you, I think there are 3 things America's got to do to be able to really maintain its liberty and be free. We need to be able to feed ourselves, produce our own food and fiber, never import our food because whoever feeds us owns us. Secondly, we've got to be able to fuel ourselves. We've got to be able to supply our own needs for energy. We've got about 600 or 700 years of energy under our own feet. The thought that we would not exploit the energy capacity that we have is nonsense to me. We have made the Saudis obscenely rich. We have empowered the Russians, and we have empowered the Iranians because we will not take our own energy out from under our feet, and we allow nations, whether it's Russia, the Iranians, the Saudis, to supply Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the world. If America would begin to be an exporter of its energy and start making Americans wealthy instead of Saudis wealthy and Russians wealthy and Iranians wealthy, maybe we would tip the balance of power in an extraordinary way and bankrupt these corrupt governments rather than to have ourselves begging for them to do something responsible. The third thing we have to do is to fight for ourselves, which means we've got to manufacture our own weapons of self-defense. The fact that we've lost manufacturing in this country is not just a jobs issue, though it is certainly that. It is an issue of national security, because if we can't build our own airplanes, tanks, bombs, and bullets, then whoever's building that for us holds us by the throat. Let's bring those jobs back, and that'll never happen as long as we let the Chinese continue to cheat in our trade deals and we don't hold people as trading partners to the same rules that we're expected to play by. That's how we treat allies, like friends, and we treat our enemies like foes. Right now, under this administration, our friends don't trust us, our enemies don't respect us. Next question.
Governor, we have one back here. Governor.
Oh, okay. There you go, Matt.
Hi, Tamara Fairbank from Canaan, where the lakes are still frozen. Science has become very politicized, and so it's important to know your stand on the climate change issue. I mean, even the Pope has an opinion right now. Global warming, fact or fiction?
I was in college when we were told, and Time and Newsweek magazine had on its covers, that if we didn't do something very, very bold and do it quickly, we would all freeze to death. And we were entering the Ice Age. Now we're entering what is going to be an age in which we're all going to burn up and everybody near the coast will drown. There, in fact, may be climate change. There's always been climate change. Climate changes, and it has through history. But the Earth is an amazing body. Now, let me be very blunt. I believe the Earth is the Lord's creation. And I believe that when He created it, He made it to be adaptable. And one of the reasons that it stood through all the eons of history is because if there is a change, then it is able to adapt. The more urgent thing that I believe exists is that we always treat this earth like we would if we were Boy Scouts at the camp. Leave your campsite in as good or better shape than you found it. But don't be so silly as not to enjoy the campsite. Take good care of the earth. Be a good steward. But for heaven's sakes, enjoy that which has been given to us for our own pleasure, purposes, and prosperity. And that ought to be the driving force of our policies there.
And this is the last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Governor. I was recently in Israel, toured the country from the Golan Heights south, West Bank, etc. It's a very small country. In my opinion, there should be no Palestinian state cut out of Israel. So
Yes.
I'm wondering, I know you're there frequently, you're friendly with the Prime Minister.
Yes.
I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
My first trip to Israel was in 1973, 42 years ago. I was 17 years old. I've been to Syria, to Lebanon, to Egypt, to Jordan, to India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, been all over the Middle East. I have a special relationship with Israel because the first time I ever went there, I fell in love with this country because I felt that that country has not just an organizational relationship with the United States, but an organic relationship with the United States, who we are and what we are. When I hear people talk about a two-state solution, I think it's the nuttiest thing I've ever heard. I'm one of the few people that will say Republicans and Democrats have both been dead wrong about the notion that two people can own the same piece of real estate when one of those parties believes the other one should not exist. That's not realistic. Let's quit pretending that there is such a thing in that particular country. And in the land of Judea and Samaria, there should not be a question as to whether or not that is going to belong to Israel, because it does belong to Israel. I was, like you, a month ago in the Golan Heights. I stood in the Valley of Tears. 250 yards was the Syrian border. Just about 2 miles from where I was, there was an ISIS camp. And in the distance, we could hear at least 10 explosions of rockets and shells going off in the civil war of Syria. We were perfectly safe where we were. And the reason we were is because Israel understands what it is to defend its borders and recognizes that it does have a right to defend itself and its people. The amazing thing is that the failed policies of the Obama administration are so horrendous that something has happened in the Middle East that 42 years ago when I made my first trip, and the dozens and dozens of trips I've made since then, I saw something over the last couple of years that I never thought could exist, and here it is. Now the Israelis are in a greater alliance with the Saudis, the Jordanians, and the Egyptians than they are with the United States. Because those countries at least have the good sense to know you don't trust the Iranians. I pray our next president will have the good sense to know we don't trust the Iranians, but we can trust our friends, the Israelis, and we can trust the leadership of other countries in the Middle East who recognize that you cannot create peace when you chant death to America in the streets of your cities. Thank you, folks, and God bless you. Enjoyed being with you. Thank you. Good to see you, man.
Chief of Staff.